Before anything else, let me set the stage with a few indispensable details. My entitled sister cut me off the moment I flatly refused to bankroll her $88,000 designer wedding gown, and then, on her wedding day, she appeared at my doorstep, demanding my presence. There's an 11-year chasm between us. I'm 36 now, and she just celebrated her 25th birthday. Neither of us was exactly a planned miracle. If you'd guessed my parents had me at 20, you'd be right. And then, 11 years later, they welcomed her, the baby of the family, into a world of indulgence. Spoiled from her first breath, she was drenched in pampering. Despite the gap in our ages, I never harbored jealousy. In fact, I reveled in spoiling her, too. With both of our parents practicing dentistry, and me dabbling in it out of sheer curiosity, I became her fiercest supporter when she declared her passion for acting. I even convinced our parents to let her enroll in film school, despite their warnings that a career in acting was as unpredictable as a roll of dice. I promised them that if her star ever dimmed, I'd be there to catch her. Back in her rebellious teenage years, I'd smooth-talk our parents into letting her attend late-night parties, trips, and far-flung concerts. I was the safety net that allowed her to slip through life's cracks, even taking the fall when she stumbled, all because I loved my little sister beyond measure. Yet, all that devotion backfired. The endless affection she received twisted her into an insufferable brat, a rude, self-centered force who scorched anyone daring to disagree. We hoped her behavior would mellow with time, but she clung to her caustic attitude. Miraculously, even with all that sourness, she charmed a man into proposing. Her boyfriend of 2 years, now her husband, popped the question nearly 8 months ago, and last week she sealed her fate in matrimony. For reasons so trivial it bordered on malice, I wasn't even invited to her wedding. While the entire family buzzed with excitement for her big day, I was arguably the most elated. She was the first to call when the proposal came through. In those early, blissful weeks, I visited her almost every weekend to hammer out the extravagant wedding plans. We all knew it would be a grand, over-the-top affair, so uniquely her style. As a still struggling actress unable to fund her own celebration, my parents graciously picked up the tab, joined by contributions from her boyfriend's well-off family. And thanks to her soon-to-be husband's secure engineering job, money was never meant to be an obstacle. I had even volunteered to cover her wedding dress, hoping she'd choose a sensible option. A close friend of mine, owner of a chic bridal boutique, had promised discounted rates on any gown we ordered. I explained this plan to her, and at first she agreed. But soon enough, she insisted on a high-end designer dress that would cost me $8,000. Normally, I wouldn't have balked. However, I'd already earmarked a fortune for her dream honeymoon, a complete European tour that would create memories to last a lifetime. A dress, worn only once, hardly justified such a staggering expense when compared to an unforgettable trip. I explained that I couldn't possibly drop another $8,000 on a mere gown, especially when a custom, reasonably priced alternative was available through my friend. Yet, she remained adamant, demanding the designer label and nothing less. True to her obstinate nature, our conversation quickly spiraled into a standoff. I firmly stood my ground, and she sulked in silence, leaving without even a proper goodbye as I left that day. I had hoped she'd change her mind and call later, but silence reigned for nearly a week. I'd been keeping the honeymoon surprise under wraps, but her prolonged coldness nudged me toward explaining why I couldn't justify such an extravagant outlay for a wedding dress. I dreaded upsetting her further, knowing she was already fraught with wedding stress, and planned to call her on the 6th silent day, the longest gap we'd ever endured. Yet, she beat me to it. I assumed her call would be laden with apologies for her pettiness over a dress, but I was sorely mistaken. She launched right in, calling me a miser for refusing to spend money she believed I had in abundance. Before I could even reply, she spat, "It's not like you have a husband or kids of your own. What do you need that money for?" I remember every word. That low blow stung deeply, especially coming from my own sister, knowing full well how vulnerable I am about my choices. I chose to remain single, by design, and to forego children, a fact that many have criticized me for over the years. Aware of my sensitive spot, she used it as a weapon, unleashing a side of herself I'd never seen before, all simply because I refused to fund an outrageously expensive gown. Fuming, I told her that she had no right to speak to me that way. After all, I was the one paying for her dress. She retorted, claiming that by letting me buy her things, she was offering me a chance to fill my empty life. Then she even accused me of jealousy, citing my approaching 40 and single status, as if that justified her actions. I couldn't take it. I hung up, too wounded to speak, and for days we exchanged no words. I wept over our bitter fight, stunned that the sister I'd once done so much for could inflict such cruelty over a dress. In the aftermath, our voices fell silent, though our parents did reach out with promises that everything would eventually be okay. They simply refused to meddle. They explained she was furious but hoped she'd come around, and I, too, clung to that fragile hope. Then, after roughly 2 months of silence, I discovered that while every other relative had received an invitation to her wedding, I had been deliberately left out. The sting of being permanently cut off after all the sacrifices I'd made was almost too much to bear. I had been ready to go all out for her wedding. Indeed, I was even prepared to fund the honeymoon of her dreams. That's why I'd hoped she'd drop this absurd dress demand. Realizing I wasn't invited crushed me, but in time, I began to see my sister for who she truly was, a self-absorbed, narcissistic brat incapable of caring for anyone unless it benefited her. With that bitter clarity, I blocked her from all my social channels and let the silence persist indefinitely, though I still kept in touch with our parents. A few months ago, over dinner and one too many glasses of champagne, I revealed the real reason behind my refusal to pay for her dress, the secret plan of a European getaway for her and her husband. I even made my parents swear to keep this confession under wraps, yet they broke their promise. Then, on her wedding morning, just a week ago, she showed up at my door at around 6 a.m., catching me completely off guard. I was still half asleep when the doorbell rang, and seeing her face on the intercom was the last thing I expected after months of silence. Instead of opening the door, I called her to demand an explanation. With an unnervingly polite tone, she asked me to let her in. I coldly refused, knowing full well the humiliation it would cause her, but I no longer tolerated disrespect. Even over the phone, she offered no apology for her previous cruelty. Instead, she claimed she'd come to invite me to her wedding as a gesture of amends. Perplexed, I mulled over why she would stand at my door on the morning of her wedding after months of giving me the silent treatment. I asked her bluntly if she'd spoken to Mom, and she foolishly admitted that she had. Instantly, I realized that Mom must have let slip the secret of my planned honeymoon gift, prompting her sudden need to mend fences. I pressed her, asking directly if Mom had revealed anything about the surprise. After a hesitant pause, she confessed that she knew exactly what I had planned, and that guilt had driven her to seek reconciliation. Had she denied any knowledge and simply admitted her mistake, I might have welcomed her inside. But her honest confession confirmed that she was only there because of the gift, not out of genuine remorse. Enraged, I told her to leave. It was all far too little, too late. Yet, she had the audacity to protest, arguing that she'd come in person on her wedding day, even if it risked her own tardiness. My anger flared further. I snapped that I never asked her to make such a pilgrimage just to invite me, and that her presence no longer mattered. The conversation devolved into bitter bickering, with her insisting that her personal visit was significant and that I should simply suck it up. I couldn't bear another moment of it, so I disconnected the call. Moments later, I heard her scream, hurling an expletive and even kicking the door. Though I briefly considered calling the police, I was too drowsy at 6 a.m. to act, and soon, her car roared away into the distance. I eventually returned to a fitful sleep, planning to discuss everything with Mom later. When I finally woke for real, my phone's incessant buzzing dragged me fully into the day. A mysterious number flashed on the screen. I assumed it was a work call, so I answered. To my shock, it was my sister's husband. He and a chorus of his friends had found a moment to unleash a barrage of curses and crude laughter right after their ceremony. The moment I confirmed it was me on the line, they launched into a torrent of insults that lasted a full 10 seconds, so loud and filthy that I could barely process a word before I hung up. Shaken, I called Mom to ask what on earth was happening. She admitted that, the night before the wedding, she had spilled the secret of my honeymoon gift to my sister in hopes of spurring an apology. She even apologized for breaking my explicit request for secrecy. When I asked about the earlier call, she claimed ignorance, explaining that she and her friends were busy snapping photos far from the chaos. She was appalled at their behavior, though I wasn't entirely surprised. It was precisely the pettiness I'd come to expect from my sister. For hours afterward, I sat alone in my room, seething silently as I plotted my next move. I was furious with Mom too, yet I recognized her heart was in the right place and eventually forgave her. But my sister, she needed to be put in her place. Calling the cops was an option, though it would paint me as the villain who ruined her wedding day, while she'd likely escape with nothing more than a slap on the wrist. Instead, I resolved to do for myself what I had intended for her, embark on that grand European tour. Out of sheer anger and spite, I impulsively booked my tickets and even invited a friend to join me, someone who was always ready for adventure. In truth, this wasn't solely about revenge. I'd longed for a spontaneous vacation to breathe life back into my routine, so this trip was as much for me as it was a subtle jab at her. 3 days ago, my friend and I set off, and now I'm wandering the storied streets of France. I've been posting every vivid detail of our journey on social media, fully aware that although we share few mutual friends, plenty of her acquaintances follow me and would eagerly pass along every update. Sure enough, news traveled fast. This morning, Mom called to confess that my sister was utterly devastated. She had spent hours in tears after seeing my gleeful posts about the tour. While she admitted understanding my motives, she also lambasted me for being petty, arguing that I should have considered our more than decade age gap before taking things so far. Apparently, my sister remains inconsolable, and many of our relatives, and even a few friends, believe flaunting my vacation is wrong. Now I'm left questioning, am I truly the asshole for showcasing my European escape after she cut me off for refusing to pay for her extravagant dress? Update 1. I'm deeply grateful for every comment and word of reassurance. It means the world that so many have shown kindness toward me. Some have argued that I was foolish for going overboard for my sister, and I can't entirely disagree. Perhaps I did spoil her more than she deserved. I now see that I was a pushover, assuming that family ties would protect me from hurt. It's painfully clear that our parents have favored her, treating my feelings as less important simply because of our 11-year difference. I remain baffled by their selective involvement. When I was crushed by her silence and biting insults over a dress, they stepped aside, yet now that she's upset, everyone's suddenly on board. I haven't confronted them yet, but if Mom calls again, I intend to set things straight. It's been 4 days since our last conversation, and she still hasn't reached out, though I suspect either she or Dad will eventually speak up. I recall how, during our last call, Dad whispered discontent to Mom, hinting at all the unsaid things he felt but dared not voice. I hadn't mentioned it before, thinking it irrelevant, but with everything swirling now, I just need to vent. I continue my trip, plastering on a cheerful facade around my friend so as not to dampen his mood, even as I stew with inner turmoil. Update 2. Today, after nearly 3 weeks of silence, Mom finally called, not with an apology, but to announce that she and Dad had decided it best for us not to meet for a while, lest it further upset my sister. It felt as if they were dismissing my pain as trivial. She added that they were funding my sister's trip to Bari to soothe her distress, which, in their eyes, erased any need for me to feel guilty. I told Mom I was glad she was finally taking decisive action as a maternal figure, even if it meant meddling in her daughter's affairs, and I wished she'd shown that same care for me when I was hurting over a damn dress. Soon after, Dad texted me, chastising my behavior with Mom and insisting I address my outbursts if our family were ever to move forward. I curtly replied with a "Cry me a river" and blocked him without hesitation. I've decided not to let my family disrupt my holiday any longer. What's the point of fighting for their attention when I'm nearly 40? I refuse to tolerate these juvenile antics from my sister or the constant enabling from our parents. After shelling out a considerable sum for this tour, I deserve to savor every moment. Until now, I had kept my troubles secret from my friend so as not to spoil our adventure, but today I finally confided in him. He assured me that I wasn't the problem at all, that my family was, without question, playing favorites. Update 3. I've just returned from an almost 6-week odyssey through Europe, and I don't mean to sound preachy, but this journey has transformed my entire outlook on life. I feel reborn, unburdened by the fact that my parents have disinherited me. I earn enough to stand on my own. An unexpected twist unfolded, too. The friend who accompanied me on this trip, with whom I've shared nearly 8 years of close camaraderie, confessed over wine that he'd long harbored a secret crush on me. Truth be told, I'd always felt something for him as well, but was too afraid to risk our friendship. Now, as we step forward together, my heart overflows with happiness. I'm grateful beyond measure for this holiday. It wasn't just about exacting revenge on my sister or defying my parents. It was a much-needed escape to rediscover myself.